Shabbat Shalom from Under the Dome. This is the Diaspora of Yashar'el. I'm here with Michael and Rob, and my name is Noel. We are going through the confidential counsels of Yahuah, or Revelation, Hebrew Revelation. And I believe this week we're on chapters 16 and 17. We will see if we get to chapter 17. We probably will, but I get the feeling that there's going to be a lot of discussion in Revelation 16 because we're at a point where it all basically comes to a head. And I think a lot of people are going to have questions about what's going down in this chapter. All right, well, with that, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it right over to Rob, and he's going to start reading from Hebrew Revelation chapter 16.
Right. I will start with chapter 16, Confidential Counsels, Hebrew Revelation. Then I heard a voice from the house of prayer, and it said to the 7 messengers, "Go and pour out the bowls on the earth, the fury of Yahuah." So the first went and poured out his bowl on the earth, and it became boils, breaking out on men who had the sign of the animal and prayed to his carved image. Then the second messenger poured out his bowl on the sea, and it was blood like that of a dead one, and all that was in the sea died. Then the third poured out his bowl on the fountains of waters, and it was blood. Then I heard that the messenger said, "Yahuah, the righteous, who was and is and will be. You are Kodesh, that you gave this judgment. For they have shed the blood of the set-apart ones, and the prophets like waters. And you gave them blood to drink, for they are worthy of this." Then I heard another messenger who spoke from inside the temple. Yes, Elohai, Elohai, ha tesovot. Your judgments are righteousness. Then the fourth poured out his bowl on the sun, and it was given to it to make heat for man. Then men had much heat, and they cursed Yahuah because of these plagues. But they did not do repentance to give him glory. Then the fifth poured out his bowl on the throne of the animal, and it was darkened, and they bit their tongues because of the pain. Then the sixth poured out his bowl on the river Parat, and the river dried up, to be a path for the kings who are at the rising of the sun. And I saw that there came forth from the mouth of the dragon, and from the mouth of the animal, and from the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean creeping things, like frogs. And these are the spirits of Hasatan, doing the signs and wonders. And they go to the kings of the earth, and to do and to all the world, to gather them to war for the day of Yahuah the mighty. Look, I will come like a thief, and blessed are those who do not sleep, but keeps himself, that he does not walk naked without clothes, that his nakedness be not uncovered. And he gathered them to a place which is called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Then the seventh poured out his bowl in the air, and there came a voice from the throne and said, "This is over." And there were voices and thunders and lightnings and an earthquake which had never happened before. And of the great city was made 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And the great city Babel was remembered before Yahuah to give her the cup with the wine of his burning anger, and all the mountains and hills fled, and were seen no more. And great hail fell on man from the heavens, and they blasphemed Yahuah because of the plague of the hail. That is end of chapter 16. And I will pass this over to Michael to start with commentary.
Alrighty, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I just caught the tail end of it, but great reviews on the Hebrew 101 from Ronit. So everybody on YouTube, if you want to learn Hebrew, join us on Discord. So I'm going to start on Revelation 16 with number 1. So I'm going to read the Hebrew. Then I heard a voice from the house of prayer, and it said to the 7 messengers, "Go and pour out the bowls on the earth, the fury of Yahuah." So I'm going to read kind of a prophetic from the prophet Zephaniah 3:8. "Therefore wait for me, declares Yah, for the day when I rise up as a witness. Indeed, my decision is to gather the nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out on them my indignation, all my burning anger, for all the earth will be devoured by the fire of my zeal." Number 2, I'm going to read the Hebrew as well. So it says, "So the first went out and poured out his bowl on the earth, and it became boils, breaking out on the men who had the sign of the animal and prayed to his carved image." So throughout this whole study, we're talking about the differences or the similarities between Revelation and Egypt and also Daniel. But in this instance, it's Egypt and Exodus. So Exodus 9:8 through 10. "Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take for yourselves handfuls of soot from a kiln, and Moses shall toss it towards the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. Then it will become fine dust all over the land of Egypt, and will turn into boils, breaking out with sores in every person and animal through all the land of Egypt." So they took the soot from a kiln and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses tossed it towards the sky, and it became boils breaking out with sores in every person and animal. Very similar. So boils, Pharaoh, beast. In verse 3, it's the same thing. I'll read the Hebrew, but I'm not going to read the Exodus verse. "Then the second messenger poured out his bowl on the sea, and it was the blood like that of a dead one, and all that was in the sea died." That's very similar to water turning into blood in Exodus as well. So these are just parallels between Revelation and Exodus. People say it's the second Exodus. I'm just trying to point out the plagues and Pharaoh. And if you recall, the beast goes and chases those keeping the commands in the wilderness. Pharaoh did the same thing. He chased them. He didn't want them leaving Egypt. And the beast doesn't want people leaving Babylon either. Number 8, I'm going to read the Greek. Let's see. "And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire." I want to talk about that word scorch. It's Strong's 2739. Hamatizo. It means to burn up, I burn, or scorch. And I love doing word studies, and it's used 4 times, and then twice in Revelation. So twice here in this chapter, or it might not be both in this chapter, but and the other 2 times are in the parable of the sower and the soils. And so that would be Mark 4 and Matthew 13. I'll just read the Matthew 13 passage, starting on 5. It says, "Others fell," these are seeds, "on the rocky places where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up immediately because they had no depth of soil. But after the sun rose, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away." So everybody goes to the literal sun, literal scorching men with fire in these verses in Revelation, but in Matthew, it's talking about your walk. It's talking about where your seed is planted. It's a little bit different. It's basically the scorching. You have no soil. You have no depth of soil, so your seed rises up and it gets scorched away because you have no root. Is that the same in Revelation, or is it a literal scorching with fire? I don't know. Or is it your walk and where your seed is planted? Last one, I'll split it and hand it off to Noel. I have a lot on the second part. Number 11, I'm going to read the Greek. "And blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds." And as you notice, if you're following along in the PDF, it's not in the Hebrew, and it's also omitted by the Codex Sinaiticus. So why would the KJV add this? Hebrew doesn't have it, and it's not in that codex. I don't know. That's all I got. I have a lot on the second part, but I'll hand it off to Noel.
I wish I could be a fly on the wall in the temple, in Solomon's temple or the second temple, and just observe, the activity of the priests, the Levites, as they're going about their business. Now, obviously, I would want to do much more than just observe. I would want to participate in, sacrifices or prayer, or whatever, worship, whatever else. But sometimes when I'm reading through scripture, I have a very hard time visualizing this stuff. Today, as a family, as we were reading our Torah portions, and I've mentioned this before, that I've stopped paying attention to what ministry is on what Torah portion. We start them in with Yom Teruah, and we of course finish them at that same time too. And so we're somewhere in Exodus, I don't know, 30ish or something like that. And I'm reading through Torah today, and I could see the eyes of my sons kind of glazed over. They're not really paying attention. They aren't really following it. And it was instructions for how to build the tabernacle in the wilderness. And I stopped and I said, because my sons are really into Legos, and I said, you guys, how you like you go out and you buy a new box for Legos and it comes with instructions, and they're like, yeah, and like, okay, so you sit there and you spend like 2 or 3 hours going through these instructions, and you build like a car or something out of it. They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, that's what is happening here. Moses is giving instructions for how to build the temple or the tabernacle. And they just got really excited. Like, what? These are instructions? I'm like, yeah, that's what this is. And then they're like asking, one of my sons asked, was the temple built of Legos? There's 7. And I was like, no, the temple was not built of Legos. It'd be totally awesome if it was, but it wasn't. And I say all this because we see something here about these bowls being poured out. And I imagine that if I were to go to the temple and I were to observe the priests with their bowls, that this passage would make a lot more sense from a practical, straightforward telling. We saw in Revelations 8 and 9 where there were 7 trumpets. And that should ring a bell for all of us about the trumpets that were blown at the at Yom Teruah, or what we call the Feast of Trumpets. And of course, throughout the year with the new moons and so on and so forth. So you see these angels blowing trumpets, but you also see them with bowls. Now, I can't speak on all that because I wasn't there. Maybe that's something Ronique could enlighten with us with a little bit of her knowledge. But I was reading this passage today, and it was almost really heartbreaking for me. There's been 2 views that I have radically changed in just the last few weeks. And that is this, that the city being destroyed here, the Babylon being destroyed, is Jerusalem. And of course, the whore of Babylon, which we'll get to in the next chapter, is also Judea. And for me, that's heartbreaking because we are actually seeing Yahuah pour out his wrath of judgment on Jerusalem. So let me okay, I'll get to that in just a second. The first thing I want to comment on is a difference in verse 1. And we see the Greek talks about, it says, and I heard a great voice out of the temple. All right, then the Hebrew says, then I heard a voice from the house of prayer. And I thought, well, that's interesting. The house of prayer. Is it, maybe just a different way to say the temple? I don't know. I can't answer that. However, I want to read from, so I did a search for anything within scripture that would refer to the house of prayer. And there might be many, I don't know. This is the one I found. So I want to read this. This comes from Isaiah chapter 56. And this is what it says. Thus saith Yahuah, keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the son of man that layeth hold on it, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it. That's us today, hopefully. We're keeping the Sabbath from polluting it. And keepeth his hand from doing any evil. Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to Yahuah speak, saying, Yahuah hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. For thus saith Yahuah unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths, and choose the things that please me, and take hold of my covenant. Even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Also, the son of the stranger that join themselves to Yahuah to serve him and to love the name of Yahuah to be his servants. Everyone that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it and taketh hold of my covenant, even them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. So there it is. So let me just back this up. Even them, those who keep his Sabbath, them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. And I, I thought that was applicable to this because we see the opposite happening here. We see these people who are profaning the name of Yahuah, and he's basically wiping them off. He's cutting them off. In the next chapter, we'll get more into the uh, the whore of Babylon and how that plays out, and really, again, how heartbreaking this really is. I mean, I was just really taken back coming to the realization of what this is, this Sodom, this Babylon being destroyed right here. The people of Elohim are being just eradicated. Anyways, I have a lot here I want to talk about. I want to really get back into the bowls I had started talking about, but that's probably enough. I'm going to hand it back to Rob, and then we'll go on from there.
All right. I got about 10 slides to share, but I'm going to do the first 3 that go up to the 6th bowl. I know Michael stopped at the 6th bowl, so I'll stop there too. That way I can follow back up after he goes. So the first bowl, and I'll drop the slide in for everybody to follow along. Okay, the first one here that's taking place is the boils, and they break out on the men who had the sign of the beast and prayed to his image. And we can relate these also to the plagues in Egypt, and we can also relate these judgments to foretold judgments from the prophets, and also warnings in Deuteronomy for us to walk in obedience. And if we're not walking in obedience, then there's going to be curses. So, looking at these judgments, we see the prophets talking about most of them or all of them. We see in Deuteronomy warning us that we will be either blessed or we'll be cursed if we're walking in disobedience. And then we can compare these also to the plague judgment that's put upon Egypt. So all of those taken in consideration, you can tie in and see how these judgments take place or have taken place in similarities from before. So here we see that in Deuteronomy, the curses talked about regarding boils, that the Lord will strike you with boils of Egypt and with tumors and festering rash and with hemorrhoids from which you cannot be healed, cannot be healed. And then also in Deuteronomy 28:35, Yahweh will strike you on the knees and thighs with severe boils from which you cannot be healed, and strike you from the sole of your foot to the top of your head. So those boils were really rough judgment back then, and that would be, I would say, comparably with this judgment here being poured out upon the men who had taken the sign and prayed to the image. And then we see in the bowl number 2 that all the sea died. It was like blood from a dead one. And also bowl 3, the fountains of waters became blood. And we see that similarly in Exodus 7:17, where it says, "This is what Yahweh says: By this you shall know that I am Yahweh. Behold, I am going to strike the water that is in the Nile with the staff that is in my hand, and it will be turned into blood." So we see here in Deuteronomy, Exodus, talking about the similitude of the judgments of the plagues being put upon Egypt. So that similarity on the Revelation judgments is pretty interesting. I will now drop the next bowl number 4, and this one here is about the sun. And I know Michael was talking about that, and I thought that was an excellent example with the sun and the seeds, with the different seeds being sown, and how if not rooted, if the seeds are not rooted in the word, if it's just they hear the word and they're excited about it and start shallowly walking in it and not truly driven for this good news and wanting to know and be grounded in it, then they're going to dry up and wither away. And we see that in many people, and it's very sad. So here, the sun's heat is made intolerable on man, and they cursed Yahuah because of these plagues. And they did not do repentance to give him glory. So I want to look at Jonah. It says here in Jonah 4:8, and this is this is Jonah talking. So, and when the sun came up, Yah designated a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head so that he became faint, and he begged with all his soul to die, saying, "Death is better to me than life." So we see here an example of the sun beaten down so roughly, even the prophet begged to die. So I can only imagine this bowl here with the heat of the sun. That's true global warming uh, to the max. That's going to be taking place. Then also here in Jeremiah, this is um, this is a very good verse regarding the positive side that Jeremiah is prophesying. Blessed is the man who trusts in Yahweh and whose trust in Yahweh, for he will be like a tree planted by the water that extends its roots by a stream and does not fear when the heat comes. This ties in with what Michael was just talking about in Matthew 13 with the seeds. If the roots aren't extended and hitting the water, then this person doesn't fully trust in Yahweh and grounded. Uh, that person doesn't fear when the heat comes. But its leaves will be green, and it will not be anxious in a year of drought, nor cease to yield fruit. It continues to yield fruit in the scorching heat because it is well grounded. So I want to tie that in with what Michael was saying. I think that is an excellent explanation of the sun and the heat. Then bowl number 5. Okay, so bowl number 5. This is the darkening. So we see here this darkness was on the throne of the beast, and they bit their tongues because of the suffering. Okay, so this darkness has taken place on the throne of the beast. And if you tie it in with the trumpets and so forth, with we see that the sun and moon are darkened and all of that. So whether this is tied in directly or if this is a separate judgment for a separate time, then it may be so. So in Deuteronomy, also talking about the curses of darkness, Yahweh will strike you with insanity, blindness, and with confusion of mind. Probably we're probably seeing this now nowadays. And you will be groping about at noon, just as a person who is blind gropes in the darkness. And you will not be successful in your ways, but you will only be oppressed and robbed all the time. Oppressed and robbed all the time. That's what taxes and having to work for the system, and no one with no one to save you. Deuteronomy 28 through 29. Then we read here in Proverbs 2:13, from those who leave the paths of unrighteousness to walk in the ways of darkness. So we see once again tying in, if you're walking away from uprightness, now you're going to be walking in darkness. We must walk in obedience, in righteousness. It's with the John studies we've been doing, and the Yochanan studies and the Revelation studies. People have got to understand and know and see the pattern of obedience If we love him, we will obey him. It's that simple. Then I want to speak on Job 12, 24, 25, that ties in with the darkness. He deprives the leaders of the earth people of intelligence and makes them wander in pathless wasteland. They grope in darkness with no light. He makes them stagger with a drunken person. So once again, he's tying in the intelligence and darkness, that they're going to do what they're going to do, but they're not doing what is right, what is of Yah. And last, Amos 5:20, talking about the day of the Lord. That day, will the day of Yahuah not be darkness instead of light, even gloom with no brightness in it? So once again, even Amos ties in prophecy to that day being darkened. And then lastly, the sixth bowl, the river, Parat River, dries up to be a path for the kings who are from the rising of the sun, which is from the east, and they will gather to Harmageddon. And there's a piece on Armageddon here that I would like Ronit to speak about. I know she has a piece on Armageddon, and Noel, if that's okay, would you want her to speak now or speak after we're done?
Well, she should just go ahead. Oh, um, yeah. Well, let's let Michael.
She can go. She can go. I was just joking.
Okay. Ronit, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, go for it.
Okay. So I wanted to share a few things about, I'm going to drop, I prepared like 3 slides that I'm going to drop one after another and just discuss it. So one moment. Oh, I'm sorry, it's like a PDF. Okay. I forgot to do it as. So why don't you go ahead and I'll just I'll join later because I need to produce pictures rather than a PDF to share what I wanted to share.
Yes,
Sorry.
yeah. You could take your PDF and save it as a JPEG or something like that. That'd be fine. Then we'll just pass it over to Michael, and then after Michael's done, perhaps you can do it, or after Noel, whichever is fine. Michael, go
Alrighty.
ahead.
Yeah. So small audible, since Rob and I were talking about the soil, and this will be a good question for the roundtable. But and for those of you, this is a Paul alert, so I'm going to read 1 Corinthians. So cover your ears if, if it bothers you. I'm just playing. 1 Corinthians 3. I have planted, Apollos watered, but Yah gave the increase. So we're talking about planting seeds and watering. That appears to be, his disciples' job. Gives the increase. How do, and this will be a good roundtable. How do we decide where our seeds are planted? So we could plant seeds, we could water, but God gives the increase. That's a good study to have. But all right, so I'll continue on mine. Number 12, I'm going to read both. So, and the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. And in the Hebrew, then the sixth poured out his bowl on the river Parat, and the river dried up to be a path for the kings who were at the rising of the sun. Just want to highlight the difference. In Hebrew, it says, who are at the rising of the sun instead of the east. I just think that's a better, more descriptive. I think that's cooler. Okay, so commentary time. And I want to talk about what preterists would say about this verse. They're claiming that this is the Parthian Empire, which was a major Iranian political and cultural power in ancient Iran from about 247 BC to 224 AD. So they would say the Parthians, the bow-wielding riders on the white horse in chapter 6. They were famous bowmen. They bring up the Parthians when talking about the beast's apparent death and resurrection, citing legends like Nero that would rise from the dead to lead a Parthian force to retake Rome. They see Parthians and the kings from the east who amass at the dried up Euphrates in this chapter. So I just wanted to throw that, commentary in about this particular verse. I have a lot on 15, so I'm going to skip ahead to 16. I want to read both. And he gathered them together into a place called, in the Hebrew tongue, Armageddon. And he gathered them to a place which is called in the Hebrew tongue, Har Megadon. And I know Ronit will talk more about it. So I found this commentary, and I've already heard this doing my 7 church studies. I know Steve Muccier believes this as well, that the word is derived from the Hebrew word moed, which means assembly. Thus, Armageddon would mean mountain of assembly, which could be a reference to the assembly at Mount Sinai, and it's to its replacement, Mount Zion. So that would change a lot of things. People are making movies about Armageddon, which is the big wrath of Yah. But what if it's literally at Mount Sinai? That's where these kings of the earth will gather, Mount of the Assembly, Moed. And I know Ronit will talk more about that if that's the angle she's going with as well. 21, I'm going to read both. And there fell upon it men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent, and men blasphemed Yah because of the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great. And in the Hebrew, and great hail fell on men from the heavens, and they blasphemed Yahweh because of the plague of the hail. Wisdom of Solomon 5:22 says, showers of hail will rain down upon them as if shot from a catapult that never stops firing. The sea's waters will rage against them, and rivers will rise up and wash over them in a fury. Thought that was a cool cross-reference. All right, now for my large one here. This is 15. I guess I'll read the Hebrew. Look, I will come like a thief, and blessed are those who do not sleep, but keeps himself, that he does not walk naked without clothes, that his nakedness be not uncovered. So first cross-reference, Genesis 3:21. And the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them, because they felt their shame and they thought they knew they were naked. Okay, so I want to talk about, I'm making the case that coming like a thief is a Hebrew idiom. So I know it's in the Gospels as well, and Revelation has it. So I'm going to be reading about the Hebrew idiom, a thief in the night. So it says, it does not refer to a criminal thief that will come in the middle of the night, take us by surprise, and steal our belongings or kill us. He is someone who has a high calling and an honorable task to fulfill. In the temple of Yahuah, a Cohen or priest was posted every night on duty to ensure the last sacrifice for the current day was completely consumed. He also has to guard the fire on the altar, so that was kept burning throughout the night, ready for the next morning's sacrifice. There were times the Cohen on duty would become tired. He would wake up every now and then to fuel the flames by adding wood and fanning. Sometimes this Cohen falls asleep and fails to perform his responsibilities of tending to the fire. Okay, so the thief in the night would come without the priest on duty knowing what hour. If he had known, he would not have fallen asleep. The Cohen HaGadol, the high priest, would enter the temple very quietly, like a thief, to check and ensure the priest on duty was fulfilling his duties. The Cohen HaGadol and his assistant would check the fire to see whether the flames were still alive. If the Cohen on duty was sleeping, the Cohen HaGadol would take an ember of coal from the fire and sneak quietly around the sleeping Cohen. He would then place a burning coal on the garment of the sleeping Cohen. When his clothes were on fire, the priest would wake up. He would have no choice but to rip them off and run home, naked and ashamed in front of the people. The thing for sure is he would never fall asleep while on duty again. So, in summary, the thief in the night is the Cohen HaGadol, the high priest, coming to check whether the priest is on duty, is carrying out his responsibilities faithfully. Those who sleep will be punished, but those who keep watch and stay awake will be rewarded. So does this give us a new definition for Revelation 16:15? Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and see his shame. And I opened up with the Genesis 3:1. Adam was a high priest. Adam was a priest. And he felt shame after the sin. So this just gives another kind of context to, and I know from experience, I always thought it was an actual thief. But this kind of is cool to where the high priest is checking to see if, because we're supposed to be priests. We're supposed to be kings of priests, right? Kings and priests. We have duties to do, and we need to be ready, if he comes and checks on us. And then finally, and then I'll hand it off to Noel. So at the end of this chapter, there'll be 21 judgments. At the end of 16, that all would have been fulfilled. So the first 7 would be seal judgments. This next group will be trumpet judgments. And then the final group are the bowl judgments. So 21 in the Bible. So the last day of Yah's annual Fall Feast of Tabernacles, which occurs every year on the 21st day of the 7th Hebrew month. You could say it pictures the end of Christ's thousand to reign on earth when the devil is loosed out of his prison for a short time. Is that coincidence? I think it fits right in that there's 21 judgments, and that is on the 7th month, 21st day. That's all I got for chapter 16. I'll hand it off to Noel.
I'm glad you talked about the thief in the night, because that's precisely what I was stating earlier, that I wish I could just go to the temple and just observe like a fly on the wall and just see how all these things, go down and be like, there he is. There's the thief in the night. Right. Well, we see the same thing with it. This was so imperative about this, because when Michael's talking about the high priest coming like the thief in the night, what is that reference to here? It's insinuating the temple. Yahusha is our high priest. He's coming to the temple like a thief in the night. And the chapter starts out talking about those who took the mark. And that, I thought that was a bit of a bombshell that Ronit mentioned. I think it was 2 weeks ago now. She's had several bombshells over the last couple months. And it seems like, we all ask this question, what was this mark? And there's a lot of good suggestions on it. But it is my current thought, and I guess this is maybe like a third thing that I've changed my opinion on radically since Revelation, that whatever this mark was, it was in the temple. There was some sort of mark, an idol of jealousy, that these temple controllers, perhaps they showed their cards, they put it up, and people, in order to go into this temple, there was a mark that they had to take part in. And that was like, Yah's like, that's it, I'm done. So starting out here, we see, and then also just in review, Rob brought up Deuteronomy 28:27. I think he mentioned also verse 22, verse 28, chapter 28. And those straight out say that Yah will do these things to the people in his covenant. If they break his covenant in these areas, he will bring these plagues. These plagues we see, the first one, the boils breaking out, comes straight from Deuteronomy 28. That's a fulfillment of that. Now, the reason I bring up the mark, that it wasn't in Rome, it wasn't in some marketplace. It only makes sense. Like, people all over the world worship other gods. They have marks. It only makes sense that Yah is concerned with what's in his temple, right? This is his temple. It is on earth as it is in heaven. It is a representative of the temple in heaven. You do not profane it, right? You don't put unclean things in there. And this is what brings about his wrath. So the first thing we see, these plagues, that, and this is, again, the heartbreaking thing, that we saw the plagues in Egypt. That was turned against the Goyim, people who weren't even in a covenant with the Most High. And the plagues were turned on them. Well, now these same plagues, we see boils, we see blood, we see darkness, we see all sorts of things that mirror these plagues in Egypt. There are some new plagues, there's some that are mirrored, but they're now turned against his own people. The first one in verse 2, the first bowl that is poured out is boils. Well, one of the interesting thoughts on this is that these people in Jerusalem got these boils because they were not practicing Torah. Let's see if I can pull this up real quick. In the book of Tobit, one of the themes of the book of Tobit, if anyone here has not read it, I suggest you. It's a phenomenal, somewhat short read. And it involves a man who, at this point, Israel, because they have become the whore of Babylon. They have gone after other gods. They have been cast out. And Tobit picks up in Nineveh when the tribe of, I can't remember what tribe it is off the moment, which it doesn't really matter, but it is one of the tribes of Israel there in Nineveh. And the man there, he is going about, they're basically, as the Israelites are being killed by the people in Nineveh, it says they will throw them over a wall. And he is going whenever he sees his own brethren there, and he will bury them. And this is fulfilling Torah, and he is being mocked by other people in Israel, for burying the dead. Like, what is this accomplishing? And, you see a man who has a heart who, this is one of the things I love about Tobit, by the way, because Tobit, they are put in this position because they did not obey Torah. And now Tobit's asking the question, now that you're in captivity, how can you obey it? It's really hard to keep when you're in captivity, but he's trying anyways. Well, all right, so let me show you where I'm going at with this. Josephus amazingly describes every single plague that is happening in this chapter, right? He gives us a visual image of these events going down. I brought up last time the 7 trumpets, which take us back to the Feast of Trumpets and also the new moons and so on and so forth, and how these bowls, I think they somehow play out with Pentecost. I can't really make a case for that quite yet. Maybe somebody else can. But the siege of Jerusalem happened on April 14th, 70 AD, just 3 days before Passover started. Now, keep in mind, the 7 trumpets would have gone off about 3 years earlier in 66 AD. 3.5, I think, yeah. And then right with the Feast of Trumpets. So that's kind of interesting to think about. All right. So this is what Josephus says. I'm going to drop this quote in here so you guys can read along. Sorry, I didn't make slides. And this is what he says. After Jerusalem was surrounded by the army of Titus, pestilential diseases soon made their appearance there to aggravate the miseries and deepen the horrors of the siege. They were partly occasioned by the immense multitudes which were crowded together in the city, partly by the putrid effluvia which arose from the unburied dead, and partly from the prevalence of the famine. Now, so he says here that they're not burying the dead, and that's a huge red flag. That should be like, well, why weren't they burying the dead? They should have been able to bury the dead. And then, of course, you read further in Josephus and the terrible things that they did there. Like they were, I don't have the quotes in front of me, but they were like, well, I think there's cannibalism going on. They were like burying jewels in their body, and people were like, cutting other people up to get the jewels. And it was terrible how basically when they took this mark, it's like Yah handed them over to their depravity, and they just became a very depraved people. These were no longer this zealous people of Yah that we imagine with the Yahudim. The second thing we see is the sea turning to blood. And I found this fascinating when I discovered this, because people will point to me when I say that this has already been fulfilled. One of the first things they turn to is Revelation 16 through 18. And they're like, what are you saying, Noel? That all the seas turned to blood and all the animals died and all this stuff? I'm like, well, I wasn't there. So I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. I can't say, but this is what Josephus says. He was there. And this is what he writes. Now, keep in mind, Josephus was one of the 10 horns. I talked about this last Thursday. He was, and some of the other horns will be mentioned here tonight, but he was one of the 10 horns. He was one of the 10 generals that were given a kingdom for an hour, and he was over Galilee. So he saw a lot of this horror that went down there in Galilee, even though, he was a spook and he was part of it. But this is what it says, describing the slaughter of the people of Joppa by the Mediterranean Sea, Josephus writes. So this is okay, the Mediterranean, but then he's going to jump over to Sea Galilee and then the Jordan. So just follow along. The sea was bloody a long way, and the maritime parts were full of dead bodies. So this is the Mediterranean. He's saying the blood and the killings was so extreme that it was just like bobbing bodies on top of the water, just blood everywhere. And then he goes on, the Sea of Galilee was also bloodied during this war when many Jews were killed there. And then regarding the slaughter, Josephus says, one might then see the lake all bloody and full of dead bodies, for not one of them escaped. Well, of course, because he had them all mass suicide. I mean, the guy was, Josephus was evil, but he's describing the sea here that, oh man, where was let's see. Okay, let me get to the next one here. So then he talks about the Jordan River. And this is what he says. The Jordan could not be passed over by reason of the dead bodies that were in it. But because the lake, the Dead Sea, was also full of dead bodies that were carried down into it by the river. So even now, if anyone's been to the Dead Sea, assuming this is the same Dead Sea, he calls it a different lake here. He doesn't call it the Dead Sea. You can't, I mean, you can't even go under if you wanted to. Like, you just float. There's so much salt. But I mean, he's saying the Jordan River can't even be passed over. There's just bodies filling in, blood going down, and just filling up the sea. I mean, this is how much death it is. When Scripture talks about, you know, blood going up to the bridle of the horse or whatever, like this is what it's talking about here. Then we see the extreme heat, which would be, what is that, the fourth bowl? Revelation 16:9. Well, this is how he describes it. Now it happened that the Samaritans, who were destitute of water, were inflamed with the violent heat, for it was summertime, and the multitude had not provided themselves with necessities, insomuch that some of them died that very day with heat. It's also interesting to point out that the Romans basically, when they would go siege these places, they would cut down all the trees. They would just wipe them out, and they would, you know, form them into the weapons, you know, the catapults and ladders and all sorts of stuff, and build their temporary forts with them or whatever. And so again, it's the same thing that Rob had mentioned with Jonah when he was sitting out there in the heat, and Yah brought the vine, and then, you know, if the vine, if you've ever seen what they believe that vine is, it you know, it doesn't give a lot of shade. But then the next day, you know, a caterpillar or whatever, a bug came along and ate it all. But so these people also in these siege cities and others, they would be sitting out there with no shade. It was all taken down. And it was a very hot summer for all those dead bodies, you know, and all that kind of stuff. All right, let's see what else I have here. Then we see, I'm not sure if Rob and Joseph made it this far, but I'll go ahead and talk about this anyways. Then this is what Josephus talks about the earthquake that comes. He says, "For there broke out a..." Oh yeah, so this actually is, the context is, this is as Titus and Vespasian are coming up to Jerusalem to conquer it, and I'll let Ronit talk more about Harmageddon, because I had the same observation that, you know, as Michael said, it's the mountain of gathering. If you pay attention to and I don't know what she's going to say, but if you actually pay attention to that verse, it never says that there is a battle there. That's important to note, right? We throw in this big epic battle there, and it actually never says that. All right. Anyways, this is what he says. "For there broke out a prodigious storm in the night, with the utmost violence and very strong winds, and the largest showers of rain, with continual lightnings, terrible thunderings, and amazing concussions and bellowings of the earth, that was in an earthquake. These things were a manifest indication that some destruction was coming upon men, when the system of the world was put into this disorder, and anyone would guess that these wonders overshadowed some grand calamities that were coming." And so this is, you know, on the eve of the destruction. Now, if you look at the flow of the next verse, it says in 19. So let me start in 18 again. It says, "And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and an earthquake which had never happened before." And this is what I think Josephus is describing right here. This was, I mean, such a violent storm that he's remembering this, and he's writing about this, and how all the soldiers are marching to slaughter these Jews in Jerusalem, and they're thinking about this. Well, then the next verse says, and of the great city was made 3 parts. Now, immediately when people read that, they think, oh, it was the earthquake that made it into 3 parts. No, I don't believe that's what it's saying. I don't think he's saying that at all. The earthquake did not make it in 3 parts. This is what was happening. Rome and Jerusalem, by the way, are actually mirrored here. Very interesting, because they're tag teaming, going back and forth between the beast and this Babylon that's being destroyed, and also, of course, we'll see the whore of Babylon. But this is what happened in AD 69. Jewish refugees from the surrounding cities that had been destroyed during Vespasian's campaign, which we saw like with Galilee and so on and so forth. What did they flee to? They fled to Jerusalem. Like that was supposed to be the last stand. And we've all heard of Masada. We won't go into that. But they're going to Jerusalem to make their last stand. Shortly after the thunderstorm that I just mentioned, a three-way civil war erupted. All right. So the Jewish rebels in Jerusalem were split into three factions. This is well documented. They were led by three different individuals, all who claimed to be Messiah. This is what Yahushua warned them about. For many will come claiming to be Messiah. Well, here we have three of them. That these three people, what are they going to do? They're going to lead everyone to their death. And this is why the Nazarene, when they saw this, and they're like, "Oh boy, like we got three people here all claiming to be Messiah. We're out of here. We're getting it because these guys are going to bring our death." Their names, according to Josephus, were John, Simon, or Shimeon, and Eliezer. Eliezer, I'm not certain. I didn't get enough time today to look these people up. I think he is the son of Ananus, the high priest who had Yaakov killed, and then we see Yochanan and Shimeon. I think all three of these guys may have been the members of the 10 Horns, the generals. I'm not exactly sure. I can't back that up at that time, but that's what my gut instinct tells me. So Eliezer and his men, and again, I think he's the son of the high priest, which is important here. He was stationed in the inner court of the temple. So he was like, okay, guys, I'm the Messiah. I'm going to take the last stand. And as the Romans come in, I'm going to conquer them all right here from the temple. They're not going to get past us. Then you had Simon, who controlled the upper city and much of the lower. And then Yochanan, John, not to be confused with Yochanan, who's writing this book, controlled the rest of Jerusalem. And anyways, all right. And then let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, this is also interesting too. It is also worth noting that with the exception of the walls surrounding the temple complex, let's see, Jerusalem was literally divided into three parts by fortified walls just prior to the Jewish war. So the city was literally divided into three parts, not just by people, but also by actual physical barricades. And let's see, what else do I have here? Okay, so and this is interesting to show how Rome is mirroring some of this, because we actually see that the plagues are exchanged between Jerusalem and back to the beast. We saw where the darkness is thrust upon the beast. And if you've been following at least what my conclusions are, it's that in 69 AD, that's when Rome died. It died with Nero in 68 AD when he, quote unquote, committed suicide or was suicided or whatever. And then we had the year of the four Caesars in 69 AD, where it's so as these three Caesars came in, and it was bookended on the other end, the fourth one by the Flavian dynasty. Rome underwent a similar three-way civil war in which, follow along, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, the three Caesars, pitted the Roman legions against each other. When one Caesar seized the throne, his rule was contested by a rival aristocrat who also declared himself Caesar. During that year, Rome was ruled by four Caesars, of course, living three of them, quote unquote, dead. And let's see, I think we have one more here. I don't know if I covered every single plague. I did most of them, but the last plague we see, and it says, "And great hail fell on man from the heavens, and they blasphemed Yahuah because of the plague of hail." Well, what do you know? There were some people will accuse me of moving the goalie net on this, but I actually believe that these hailstones were falling on Jerusalem from the heavens. And I kind of suspect that these were the huge white hailstone looking stones that the Romans were just bombarding Jerusalem with. that completely, it's like something out of Lord of the Rings. If you can think about that, the siege at the end of Return of the King. And this is what Josephus says. Now, the stones that were cast were of the weight of a talent and were carried 2 furlongs and farther. The blow they gave was no way to be sustained, not only by those that stood first in the way, but by those that were beyond them from a great space. That's a little confusing, but he's talking about great destruction. As for the Jews, they at first watched the coming of the stone, for it was a white color. And then I put emphasis. Well, you can't get the italics there. Anyways, and so I think that this is the siege that he's describing. It all went down around Pentecost. And I think that these angels, I'm envisioning these angels pouring out the bowls all at the same time. And so the order, they were all kind of interconnected with each other. It wasn't like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 like that. It was like maybe 1, 2, 1 through 7 all at the same time and kind of ending, kind of differently and so on and so forth. That's how I envision it. Anyways, back to you, Rob.
Yeah, okay. Just to follow up on what you were saying there with the bowls and the sequences, etc. I believe it was in Baruch. I can't be 100% sure. Reading what he was talking about regarding the end time is that these events will be happening overlapping each other, as to making it difficult to interpret the bowls and the judgments happening. It's like coinciding with each other in different events, different areas. So that's why it makes it harder for people to make it clear for them to see these judgments prophesied against the world on that. So I just don't have that quote. I did want to start with Ronit, if you're ready to talk about Armageddon. Please do before I start.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Okay, so I'm going to start by dropping this map so we know what we are talking about. So I kind of, on the map, I circled in red more or less the area that relates to Megiddo whenever Megiddo is mentioned in the Bible. So Megiddo is at least used to be a mountain in that area where the red circle is, and it's a huge area. It's a valley called Valor of Israel, and in English it was translated to Jezreel or something weird. I have no idea, but it's called Israel, like with a Z. So this is the area I'm going to discuss, and I'm going to show you some picture in a moment. So let me start. Okay. So first, I just dropped a slide. I don't know why it wouldn't open for me. Can you see the slide that I just dropped?
No.
It's the map.
I only see the map.
Okay, 1 moment. Okay, sorry. Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's start with this. So Megiddo, in the Bible, it's spelled 3 different ways. As you learn today in the Hebrew class, you can have the letter Yud or no Yud, and it will sound E. So Megiddo, Megiddo, or Megiddon with N at the end. Okay, so that's how it's spelled in the Bible. It was within the tribe of Menachem's inheritance. Moses' final blessing on Israel. You can find it in Deuteronomy 33. He's talking about the inheritance of Joseph, and he keeps saying the word precious things. I mean, in English it sounds like precious thing, precious fruits, precious produce, fullness, abundance, That's basically the root of Megiddo. It's Meged, okay? So on the right side of the slide, I gave you 3 options for what that word can mean. So most likely based on the fact that it fall within the inheritance of Joseph, and when we look at the blessing from Moses, it is talking about abundance and precious produce, basically best of the best of the best. That's what Meged means. And I also put the Aramaic, in Aramaic it's Magdin, so it's like Megiddon, you know. Then the second option, another root, which I don't think that it's the root, but some scholars think that maybe this is the root of the word Megiddo, and it's like Gimel Dalet Dalet, which means battalion, gathering of multitudes. Option 3 for Megiddo is the root is Nun Gimel Dalet. It's to announce or to tell. Okay. So next. Okay, so Megiddo was part of the inheritance of the tribe of Menachem. As the firstborn of Joseph, Menachem received a double portion of the inheritance, despite Ephraim's greater blessing of influence and prosperity. The tribe of Menachem received a double portion of land upon Israel's conquest. Thus, it was the only of the 12 tribes of Israel to receive an inheritance on both sides of the Jordan River. According to scripture, the first inheritance for the tribe of Menachem was handed out east of the Jordan to East Menachem in the Transjordan. However, the heartland of the northern kingdom of Israel would be found west of the Jordan in the tribal territory of West Menachem. So Megiddo has a strategic location. Strategically, it's perched above the most important land route in the ancient Near East. The city dominated international traffic for over 6,000 years. Megiddo's importance was undoubtedly due to its role as a way station and control point for international trade. Its strategic location gave it control of a bottleneck where the road emerges from the narrow pass into the fertile Israel. That's what I say. In English, you call it Jezreel, but in Hebrew, it's Israel. That's the valley. Megiddo was the site of epic battles that decided the fate of Western Asia. 6 letters sent by a king of Megiddo to the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten in the 14th century BCE were discovered in the archive of El Amama in Egypt. The letters indicate that Megiddo was one of the mightiest city-states in Canaan. As civilizations came and went, succeeding settlements of ancient Megiddo were built on the ruins of their predecessors, creating a multi-layered archaeological legacy that abounds in unparalleled treasures that include monumental temples, lavish palaces, mighty fortification, and remarkably engineered water system. The Bible lists the king of Megiddo among the Canaanite rulers defeated by Joshua in his conquest of the land. And according to 1 Kings, King Solomon built Megiddo together with Hatzor and Gezer. At that time, the city had become the center of a royal province of the United Monarchy. Megiddo is the only site in Israel mentioned by every great power in the ancient Near East. Now let me just say a few words about the Valor of Israel. So the Valor of Israel, that's, as I said, Megiddo is sitting, it's basically, there is a bottleneck leading to the Valley of Israel, and the Valley of Israel is the largest valley in the entire state of Israel. It's huge, huge. There are several mountain ranges that are surrounding that valley. It's considered the most fertile land in Israel. It's so gorgeous, words cannot describe it. Once you pass the bottleneck through Megiddo and you enter the valley, your eyes will behold a beautiful picture. I mean, it looks something like Tuscany. It's gorgeous, okay? And most of the produce in Israel is produced in that valley. It's very, very fertile. So in the Bible, Valor of Israel was mentioned dozens of times. Every time it was mentioned, it was mentioned either in the name Valley of Israel, or it was called the Valley of Megiddo. It was always attached to the word Megiddo. So in Hosea, there are a few verses about the Valley of Israel, and basically, it's a, figuratively speaking, it relates to the kingdom of Israel. So that was the largest area in the kingdom of Israel. So the Lord said unto him, call his name Israel for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Israel upon the house of Yahuah, and will cause to seize the kingdom of the house of Israel. And when you read this, the rest of the verses, you can see that he's calling the house of Israel Valley of Israel. Okay, so there are many verses in the Bible. I just mentioned just a few of them, but so many great battles were fought and won or lost in that area. The tribe of Menachem, when they got their inheritance, which I showed you the map, basically they had a huge inheritance. Only Judah, the tribe of Judah, had larger inheritance. Like from a land perspective, the tribe of Judah was the only tribe that got more land than Menachem. But Menachem got a huge inheritance. And all of this inheritance was in the middle of the kingdom of Israel. So the reason I wanted to mention all of this to you is because I wanted to make the case that Jerusalem and Megiddo, or that area around Megiddo, were the two most strategic locations in the Bible. Okay? And it makes sense to me that once Yah is done with the destruction of Jerusalem, which we read about it very clearly, you know, in the verses in this chapter in Revelation, it makes sense to me that when he is done with Jerusalem, he is going to also be done with that area. So when I went digging regarding what archaeologists found in this area, I want to show you a couple of headlines. Okay, so what they are saying is that there was an ancient fire that leveled Megiddo in under 3 hours. They can see it through the mud bricks. That within less than 3 hours there was a total destruction of that area. This is another article on the subject. Okay. I want to start showing you some pictures. So when you look at this picture, what you see is, ignore the highway because the highway is a modern thing. What you see is a huge valley. You can see the beauty of it. You can see the agriculture. You can see mountains in the background. But what you see up closely is what is called Mount Megiddo, which really doesn't look like a mountain. It looks like a chopped mountain to me. That's what it looks. Okay, like it used to be a mountain, but someone chopped it and then burned it completely in less than 3 hours. Okay, here is another view. Okay, chopped mountain. Okay, just to get some perspective, let me show you real mountains just around the valley. The other mountains look pretty real. Okay, that's Mount Tabor. That's how you call it in English. This is the next mountain, Mount Gilboa. Real mountain. Gilboa is a chain of, it's a mountain range actually. But you can see real mountains here. But when you look at Megiddo, you see something that I would call it an X mountain. Okay, like it used to be a mountain. Something happened. When you look at the pictures of Megiddo, you can see that something happened that caused some tremendous damage to that mountain, and anything that was left is just some archaeological digs that can show that there was scorching fire, and also most archaeologists agree that there was also an earthquake that caused a lot of damage to that area. So the bottom line of what I'm saying is I completely, I am on the, I'm of the opinion that John is referring to this area. This was the most strategic area in biblical time. It's actually still a very strategic area, even nowadays in modern times. So after Jerusalem, that was the gem, the jewel of the biblical kingdom. It represented affluence, it represented prosperity, and I can only imagine if there were many I believe that many armies gathered here, and if all of them died, then I can only imagine what brought the land to be so fertile, unfortunately, from all of the dead bodies. So anyway, so that's what I wanted to share about my thought about Megiddo.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you, Roni.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, that was my thought too. Is with the amount of battles and death there, that's one good reason why the soil and land there is so fertile. Unfortunately, due to all of the organic matter, so to speak, that passed away there. Excellent stuff. I hope you guys were able to download that and save that. I am going to continue. I'm going to start back on the seventh bowl, and what I wanted to follow back up with the bowls is that once again the judgments that are taking place, they're either blessings or curses, and we see that these judgments are taking place because of the disobedience. So we read here, the voices and the thunders and lightnings and the earthquake which had never happened before. Babel, the great city, was made 3 parts, and the city and the cities of the nations fell. So I'm just going to touch on the term of the great city. 4 times it's referred to in Nineveh, the great city, in Jonah, and 1 time in Jeremiah referred Jerusalem as the great city. So here I'm going to read in Jeremiah 22, 5 through 10. But if you will not obey these words, I swear by myself, declares Yahuah, that this house will become a place of ruins. There it is. Do not obey these words. For this is what Yahuah says concerning the house of the king of Judah. You are like Gilead to me, like the summit of Lebanon. Yet most assuredly, I will make you a wilderness, cities that are not inhabited. For I will set apart destroyers against you, each with his weapons, and they will cut down your choicest cedars and throw them on the fire. And we've read, I can't remember when, a few weeks back, about cedars, the cedars of Lebanon representing peoples, strategic people. So then we have, and they're going to be thrown into fires. Many nations will pass by this city, and they will say to one another, why has Yahuah done this to this great city? Then they will answer, because they abandoned the covenant of Yahuah, their Elohim. There it is. I mean, once again, just continues to answer that question. And they bow down to other gods and serve them. They committed adultery, harlotry, etc. And we'll continue to read that about the woman in the next chapter. Do not weep for the dead or mourn for him, but weep deeply for the one who goes away, for he will never return or see his native land. So yes, the seventh bowl, we have the part about the great city. Then I want to talk about the mountains that are disappearing, being fled away. So we also read in that verse, all the mountains and hills fled away, and we're seen no more. And we see prophesied by Isaiah against the mountains. Yahuah will go out like a warrior. He will stir his zeal like a man of war. He will shout. Indeed, he will raise a war cry. He will prevail against his enemies. I have kept silent for a long time. I have kept still and restrained myself. Now, like a woman in labor, I will groan. I will both grasp and pant. I will lay waste the mountains and hills and wither all their vegetation. I will turn the rivers into coastlands and dry up the ponds. So here, Yahuah has been patient. He's been holding back and restraining himself until that day, and then judgment fully comes upon the mountains. And then we see in Ezekiel, he prophesies against the mountains also. Mountains of Israel, listen to the word of Adonai Yahuah. This is what Adonai Yahuah says to the mountains, the hills, the ravines, and the valleys. Behold, I myself am going to bring a sword against you, and I will destroy your high places. That's chapter 6, verse 3, and chapter 36, verse 6. So that is on regarding the mountains. That's been prophesied again. And here we see it taking place in Revelation chapter 16. Then the last part of that is the great hail that fell on man. So the great hail, let me share that. All right, so now the great hail fell on man from the heavens, and they blasphemed Yahuah. Well, we see Joshua, he writes out, and Yahuah said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of them will stand against you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly by marching all night from Gilgal, and Yahuah brought them into confusion before Israel, and he struck them down in a great defeat at Gibeon, and pursued them by the way of the ascent to Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Ezekah and Makkedah. And as they fled from Israel, while they were at the descent of Beth Horon, Yahuah hurled large stones from heaven on them as far as Ezekah, and they died. There were more who died from the hailstones than those whom the sons of Israel killed with a sword. So we see here during the time of Joshua, these hailstones coming down from Yah, sending them down as judgment on the peoples for supporting Joshua. So once again, we see the prophets, these judgments discussed that have happened in the past, and they will happen again according to Revelation, and they have, and they will continue to happen because we see these things continue to play out as the judgments of Yah being put forth on the people. What I also want to talk about, and you've probably seen this before, where people share the plagues in Exodus related to Revelation, and I somewhat modified that, and I dropped it down there so you can see each Exodus plague, the 10 plagues, and I have a correlation for each one in the scripture references that are speaking to the plagues in Exodus, and then something related to them in Revelation. Now, the only one that doesn't have a link that I could find directly was the mention of the plague of lice in the third plague of Exodus. Lice coming from all the dust of the earth, where the lices come out of and come from. And so I want to speak about the lice. So I will drop another slide on lice. And so what I did was I looked at the ancient Hebrew on that, because I wanted to see if there was something hidden in there, if at all anything. And what I think is that when you're looking at the pictograph, the picture of an open palm and a picture of a seed for this word for lice, if it is truly lice in that aspect or gnat, the root word begins to form the base of the plant by going down into the soil, and the plant rises out of the ground, forming the stalk of the plant. A tree then can only stand tall and firm because of the strong root system which supports it. And here again, another depiction of a plant being well rooted in the soil. Once again, circling back around to that type of uh, idiom and discussion. But what I'm trying to get to here is that this pictograph for lice pictures opening of a seed and it beginning to form and going down into, and then planting itself or securing itself and then rising out from it. And they get the term or the description of a gnat or lice, a firm standing insect. It can be translated as firmness in a situation, standing tall and firm, an upright person, a column, etc. So we can see that the lice was firmly a how would you say a plague that was just I'm looking for the right word, just intolerant and causing much displeasure, and it did that. So I wanted to add this to it to see if anyone else picked anything out of that regarding for the lice, if something came to them. But I didn't have anything solid on that. But I could see a lot of things come out of this, but nothing directly to the lice and revelation from this. So I wanted to share that because as I do these dives and there's no clear answer, sometimes someone out there can drop something added to it and just make it even great to share. Lastly, I want to talk about the frogs, the unclean spirits. And so we see that these three spirits of Hasatan in verses 13 and 14, they come out of the mouth of the dragon, they come out of the mouth of the beast, and they come out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are three unclean creeping things like frogs. That Hebrew word for unclean creeping things, and hopefully I can say this right, shratzim, is short legs or no legs that's related to or describing a reptile, amphibian, bugs, shrimp, crabs, that sense. And so, what I think of a description of an unclean, creeping thing like frogs, we can always look at this picture here, doing signs and wonders, and they go to the kings of the earth and to all the world to gather them to war for the day of Yahuah the mighty. And so we see that these unclean, creeping thing like frogs, as he mentions here, I drop in there different pictures of, we see frogs, different types of frogs, and different makeups of I guess you'd say little gray aliens and stuff like that, but it could be something similar to that as something to think about. But uh, uh, that's just something to roll around in your mind and think about as a possibility that they come out. But with that, I will pass it over to Michael for further discussion. And over to you, Michael.
Are you with us, Michael?
Michael, we're not hearing you.
I see he has turned his microphone on, but still not hearing anything.
He said go without him. I guess he's having technical difficulties.
All right, down for tech issues. All right, well, I don't have a lot more to add. I did like that you. I actually really do like that you threw in those alien grays there, and I'll have to. I don't know if this is an appropriate time or not, but maybe in the discussion afterwards, if anyone wants to know, I can give you my alien gray encounter story. I do believe they are legitimately real. I have seen them with my own eyes. Let's see. What did I want to touch on? Again, I'm just going to kind of book in here where I started. I really was overcome this week with how tragic this really is. That if you guys think about this, the Bible ends with the destruction of the Holy Land. Well, not exactly. I mean, if we talk about the millennial kingdom, but the whole idea is that that they're you see Abraham go out there with Shem, and then the promise of that land, and then they come out of the Exodus, they wander, they come into their land, and they live there, and then it's like this whole story, and then it ends on such a dark note. I mean, I never really thought about how dark this truly was. We talked about like movies ending on a dark note, like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, where a spoiler alert, Spock dies, or the end of The Empire Strikes Back, or something like that, and you walk out like going like, man, that was really dark. And that's like what's happening here. And so I have a few scripture verses I want to throw in. Now, I started out talking about bowls, and we see the drink offering talked about in Numbers 28:7. The night is getting late. I won't talk about that. We see the Pentecost drink offering in Leviticus 23:18, which I think is interesting because I do believe that these bowls were poured out in the whereabouts of Pentecost, or maybe perhaps on Pentecost. We see that grapes are referred to as blood, the blood of the grapes. So I will read this really quickly. I'm going to put this into scripture bot here and see what it says. It says, he washed his garments in wine and his robes in the blood of the grapes. We saw earlier in Revelation 14:10 when it talked about the wine of Elohim's fury. And then we see this prophecy here in Matthew 23 verses 35 through 36. And this is says, so that on you should come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the dwelling place and the slaughter place. And he says, on you, all this blood that you shed of the righteous, all the righteous blood that was shed, it's coming on you. And oh man, I didn't put verse 36 in there. Let me try that again. 23. I wish I did that right, because now I got to do this again. 35 through 36. I did it. Whatever. Here, I'll just read this here. Whatever. He says that it's all coming down in this generation, all right? This generation, all this blood. And then here's the last really heartbreaking one. And you guys will all be familiar with this. This comes from Matthew 27. This is the crucifixion section. And it says, and the governor said, indeed, what evil has he done? This is Pilate speaking. And they were crying out all the more, saying, let him be impaled. Of course, this is not the Hebrew. This is the Greek, of course. And when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but rather an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of the blood of the righteous one. You shall see to it. And all the people answering said, his blood be on us and our children. And that is so tragic because the very governor here who washed his hands of this, and as we saw in our canon study, the big shocking surprise ending of that movie was that the Romans indeed did not crucify Messiah. The Romans were brought in as the beast to destroy the very people who basically said, we have no Elohim but Caesar, and let the blood be on us and our children. And they're like, okay. And they came in and did it. So that's kind of how this chapter ends. It's dark, and it's should be disturbing, and cause us all to repent. And we see all throughout Revelation in a lot more in the Greek than the Hebrew, I've noticed, but it says that these plagues would come on these people and still they would not repent. Over and over, the set apart were repenting, which made them set apart and righteous. But all these other people, they were not repenting, and they were handed over to their own darkness, as Rob talked about earlier tonight. So with that, that's all I have to say on this. Michael, are you with us? Did you want to add anything at this time, or are you still having technical difficulties? I think he's still having tech difficulties. So
he typed that he's done with this chapter.
Okay. Rob, did you have anything else to add before we start roundtabling this? I think tonight we're going to cut it off at this chapter, chapter 16, because this has taken us, it's been a great discussion. We had tons of content, but I would much prefer hearing what you guys have to say about this now. So Rob, are you all done with your initial commentary?
Yeah, I'm done with what I wanted to show, and it's like every week there is that reinforcement of what happens to those who are obedient and what happens to those who are disobedient, with these plagues, with these judgments, curses, and or blessings. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that.
All right, guys, what did you guys think? What are your thoughts, observations? Come on down and let us know.
I have a few more thoughts.
Well, you were just commenting on that it really does read in the next few chapters like it already happened.
Yeah, now it obviously like it does, and where I have shifted my views dramatically is, and in a couple of weeks we'll be done with this, and we'll kind of Rob, Michael, and I will kind of give all of our, I guess, thoughts on the entire book. But I can tell you now, like I said tonight, I've had radical view changes on the mark of the beast, on what Babylon is being destroyed, and also the beast and all sorts of stuff. And so, yeah, I really started out this book thinking that there was going to be some sort of division that happened around Revelation 12 that would then be far future tense to John or Yochanan, but still past tense to us. But it's like, no, I'm seeing this whole thing going down at once. And one of the I think confusing things is that when you're dealing with prophetic picture books, and these prophets, they would write with these pictures, is that they often gave two different pictures for the same thing. And that's what Revelation is. Like the first half is one picture, and then the second half is kind of another picture. And a good example of that is in Genesis when Pharaoh had 2 dreams of the cattle and the corn, and nobody was able to interpret them. And Joseph was brought out of prison to interpret the 2 different dreams, and they were the same thing. And so I kind of see that's what's happening now in Revelation. So
Can I ask a question about that?
please do.
So do you think like even Revelation like 20, 21, like do you think the short season and all that even happened, and like the whole book, and maybe where there's like a puzzle piece missing?
I mean, that's obviously, every option is obviously worth considering. So, but the problem is with that is that Revelation ends with, new heaven, new earth, death is done away with. So, I mean, obviously, it would be a stretch of my imagination to come to the conclusion that we're living beyond the realm of death being done away with. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, brings this again to the middle of chapter 20, right before 21.
And that's where I'm kind of on the edge of my seat right now, guys, because I've been in this investigation over the millennial kingdom and all that stuff. I still am holding out. I believe it physically happened, that it's not just some spiritual kingdom. Now, the kingdom of heaven is a spiritual kingdom, and the kingdom of heaven has been around since before the creation of this earth. Yahushua has been the king of it. So, obviously the kingdom of heaven was a spiritual kingdom when Yahushua walked the earth the first time. Obviously, he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." I still hold out, though, to all the prophecy of the lion and the lamb stuff, and the grapes and the wine, and all the stuff that the prophets talked about his kingdom on this earth. I still believe it's there and it happens. I don't know where the cutoff is going to be in Revelation. That's where I'm kind of getting on the edge of my seat. Like, how is this going to end? How does this transition from the destruction of Jerusalem to the millennial kingdom? And I don't know.
I was having like 2 random thoughts. One was like that maybe this is a new age beyond all of that. So like the next go around or whatever. Or the other one is kind of dumb. You'd probably know more about this though, from like a firmament perspective. But like, what if this whole thing like happened on a higher firmament? And would that even be possible?
Okay, so just in review of what you just said, we're already struggling with the term TUC, the unexpected cosmology. We joke the unexpected cult. And then we have Millennial Kingdom, MK, and people, it's like code word for MK Ultra. But now you want to call us the New Agers. we are in a we're in the New Age. So yeah, obviously, yeah, can't answer that.
For me personally, it's been such a journey of discovery. The last few weeks reading Revelation with all of you, and I came in. I joined the group. I was very skeptical about the millennial kingdom already have happened, but now to be honest, I'm not skeptical anymore, and every week I have another piece of the puzzle that closes this argument for me. And the piece that I shared today about Megiddo, for me that was another piece. It was another piece that already happened, and I can see it now more clearly. And I think one of the things that really tie everything for me is, I mentioned it on Thursday, it's Deuteronomy 28. I really cannot get over it, and I highly recommend to everyone. I'm even considering getting a printout of it and framing it and hanging it on the wall. This chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, is so powerful. It's so amazing, and it pretty much summarizes everything. And once you read the curse part of it, it's word by word exactly what happened during the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, down to the most little details. Okay, they are there. And tonight you saw Rob quoting verses from the chapter and comparing it to the chapter 16 of Revelation. I think really the destruction that was prophesied in Revelation is of Jerusalem, not of a future make-believe Babylon. It was referring to the great city Jerusalem, and then the Armageddon was the second biggest strategic area in Israel. And the millennial kingdom, in my opinion, when it happened, it didn't happen in the land of Israel, because the land of Israel is supposed to remain desolate until the last judgment. And I think I'm very scared about what the Zionists did by on their own accord deciding to gather the Jews. I mean, I want to cry when I think about it, because they gathered millions of Jews from all over the world and brought them there, making them believe that this is a divinely ordained thing. But it's not. The land of Israel was supposed to remain desolate until the last judgment.
Well, that's really fascinating, Roni, and I would actually like to, for obvious reasons, I would like to do more studies on that. And what you just said, everyone listening and also on YouTube, you guys have probably noticed that I have gone back and forth, almost like bipolar, on this idea of where is Israel, right? Is this, the historical Israel? And I go back and forth. But what you just said, and I would like to do more of a study on that, that actually fills in a lot of pieces and makes me very comfortable with the land of Israel being the historical land of Israel. And it makes total sense in a post-mud flood context, it being a wasteland, and your observations of why did they not build on it? Why was it so desolate? Why don't we see these great millennial kingdom structures there, like the Palace of Versailles and that kind of stuff,
Exactly.
or even great if you just want to go the Gothic route, which is interesting, everyone, just to think about, because a lot of the people in the millennial kingdom discussion, they're really leaning towards the Gothic buildings being millennial kingdom, and that's interesting because the word Goth is actually it's not flattering. It's almost like you think, like back in the 90s when I was a teenager, we had what we called goth teenagers. And I was never goth, but I wore a little bit of goth. Like I had the big black Caterpillar construction boots and, dressed in a lot of black and that kind of stuff. And, and so goth is kind of something, it's almost, it's the architecture critics, they started calling these goth because to frown on them. And that makes total sense in Orwellian society, how you would flip it, right? You would take something that is beautiful and potentially in this case of Yah and say it's ugly, right? So all that to say, I feel a lot better about that, and I would like to do past notes with you sometime on.
I would love to. And you mentioned the Goth, and I just want to tell you that I am 100% convinced that the Goth are actually the descendants of the tribe of Gad, because the way Gad was spelled in the Bible, you can actually say it Gath, Th. And Gad and Menachem were supposed to be the mightiest warriors of all the tribes. They won. They were just. I mean, there are stories upon stories on how Giborim they were, both Menachem and Gad, and they are the one that together beat most of the giants, including Og, king of Bashan. So and the Goth, I mean, when you look at their history, of course, from an alternative perspective, not mainstream stupid history, the Goth, I don't think anyone comes close to their skills in battles, and I mean they were amazing. So I would love to kind of like dig more into goth stuff, and also I believe that the Scythians are actually some of the lost tribes, and I'm already gathering mountain of information on them. I just don't have time to dig into it and make sense out of all the information that I have.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out because primarily one of the big mysteries that have come forward with let's just say Tartarian. You guys know what I mean by that. The whole Tartarian research is that there's primarily two types of buildings. What we call the Goth, these great cathedrals, very spiraling, tall buildings, but also the Greek Roman revivals. And here, let me turn this. Wendy, I just muted you there. I can unmute you if you'd like, but and the other, so the Greek Roman revival buildings are the other. Those are like the Corinthian pillars, the domes, so you think of like the U.S. Capitol buildings and stuff. And these are all intermingled. And this is the great mystery, what's going on. And I'd like to get to the bottom of this because I'm not buying the theory that the Greek Roman revivals were against the Goths and that they came later. I'm not buying that. I think that there's some sort of division that happens. There's some, like almost like a checkerboard of duality, maybe that's even looking at it wrong, but something about the different tribes and different, styles that came from those tribes. But I do have a lot of questions because, when we spent, here I'm going to talk about it again, Europe, but I think we have someone do we have anyone from London in the room right now? When we were in the UK, it was really interesting to spend a month in England and then or Great Britain, and then a month up in Scotland. And you go to England, and the buildings there are beautiful, Goth cathedrals, castles, that kind of stuff. And you go up a little bit north to Scotland, and they're all destroyed. Most of them. There's Edinburgh. There's a couple. And the official history tells you, the whole William Wallace thing, right? Like they were going, the British were going up there destroying their castles. But those are some of the mysteries. The mysteries out there, like why are some of the Goth buildings more destroyed than the Greek Roman? And those are good questions to have that I don't have answers to. Now I'm going way off in our Revelation study. Ronit, what you said just triggered me in a good way. Like, it clicked. But you're talking about Israel not being inhabited. And that it just all came together. I'm like, oh my goodness, that was a huge bombshell what you just said, because that solves everything for me. Like things that I was in turmoil over. I'm like, that explains it.
Thank you.
So maybe later you can help me, pass some of those, if you can dig some stuff up in scripture and kind of pass that by, and I can do something on that.
Sure.
Yeah, I also wonder regarding the Goths and the steampunk era that we see out there, if it has tied anything to historical significance or history evidence anywhere. But I thought that was interesting, the whole steampunk genre of that possibly being some time in the past, fitting in that with the gadgets and so forth. Just a thought.
Did anyone have anything specifically on, before we start wandering off too far into discussion tonight? Of course, I wanted to thank everybody for coming. I guess I'll give my thanks after this if no one responds. But does anyone have anything specifically on Revelation chapter 16 that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I just wanted to say something about balls because you're so enamored by them. So I just wanted to tell you that there are all kind of rituals in Judaism to do with balls. So, for example, when you wash your hand before a meal, you don't it's a ritualistic washing. It's not like putting your hands under a faucet. Like you basically take a bowl and fill it with water, and then alternate between the hands and just kind of like spill a little bit water on one hand, then on the other, then like 3 times on each side. Another example that I have is with Passover, the Passover meal. So when the family sits around the table and read the Haggadah, that little booklet with the story of the Exodus. So when we get to the point where we are supposed to read, all of us, like everyone around the table, is supposed to read out loud the 10 plagues. Okay, so the way it goes is that the patriarch, like the father, that sits at the top of at the head of the table, he and someone else, each one of them hold a bowl, and one bowl has water and another bowl has red wine representing blood. And then there is a third bowl in the middle. And every time everyone is shouting a name of a plague, then both people holding the bowls throw a little bit from the water and from the blood wine, into the big bowl. So those are just a couple of examples. So I think that, when you mentioned, you and I think Michael maybe mentioned about the priests and all kind of rituals at the temple, I think that some of those rituals kind of like found their way to modern days. So we are still kind of obsessed with balls, basically.
Mike, you were going to say something? Well, go ahead,
Yeah, I
Mike.
was going to mention with what Ronnie was saying earlier about what you were talking about with where Israel is, but the conclusion is the same, that whether it is there or not, that it does fit the narrative, and the significance of it is the sign that it wouldn't happen until the end. So that's another sign of the times that we're in.
Well, here was my logic on some of my logic on really questioning Israel was, or justifying that it was not Israel, the land, is that Satan, he kind of he did it in order to sell the Bible more, right? In order to, he gives us the truth of the Bible and lies to us about it. But in order for him to be able to do that, he needs a land that he could plop down and say, okay, this is the promised land, right? Well, the thing is, though, is that it may be more of a damning case if we're not supposed to be there. Like if we're not supposed to be in Israel, and you could have all sorts of questions too about, sacrifices and that kind of stuff. And this will, of course, people will differ on opinion on whether we should have sacrifices or not anyways now. But it could be really bad if people are going there, as Ronit said, and believing that it was divine or it was Yah's will, divine will, that, they go back and it wasn't. That's bad. Just something to think about.
Yeah, there are about half of the ultra-Orthodox Jews, the ones that you see with all of those, I call them the costumes, the hat and the coats and the black jackets, about half of them are anti-Zion.
Catholic nuns. I never thought of it like that. Your version of the penguin.
So about half of them are actually anti-Zionist, and they believe that we committed a huge sin, borderline blasphemy, going to Israel and rebuilding it. without like, and not waiting for Yah to do it, to bring us there.
Well, I've heard about this, and you'll see these Jewish people against Zionism. You very seldom hear about them. That there is a sizable part of the population, which you just described further. Wow. Yeah, they believe that Zionism is really, against the Most High, against the Jewish people. I didn't hear about that. See, that's the interesting. We didn't hear about building there. That's come out there today, and that there is people, Jewish people, as you just described. That's one of the reasons they're really against it, because you shouldn't do that. It's only Yah can. So, that's maybe lends credence again to what we were saying about Israel is be dealt with last, is because, as you were saying, and like we were saying, to build that third temple we were reading about, that's not prophesied in the Bible, or where we were at least reading in Scripture, and that this is really, as some of the people have been saying, very blasphemous and kind of evil, how you were describing it.
I just wanted to answer to Sarah. So Sarah wrote, the ultra-Orthodox ones, who are they? They think it's a sin, but they are there too. So first of all, most of them don't live in Israel. Most of them live in the US, mainly in Brooklyn, okay? And you have to realize that even though Israel was in complete desolation for 2,000 years, there has always been a small, tiny community left there in certain location, mainly in the Galilee and also in Jerusalem. Always there was a tiny bit of a minority of Jews that were left there. But those Jews never try to establish a state again, a statehood, okay? So the ultra-Orthodox that still live in Israel, they do not recognize Israel as, they don't participate in any civil duty, they don't vote, they completely are against Israel. In fact, many times they cooperate with Muslim countries that are our fierce, that are the fiercest enemies of Israel. So even though they live there, they don't participate and recognize the state of Israel.
Well, I thought that this chapter here once again speaks to everyone about the blessings and curses, and simply knowing that we should be following his ways, trusting in him, and if we're going to be obedient to our Father, and we take him as our spiritual father, obviously, then we want to do what he instructs us to do. And by doing so and being obedient, we find favor and protection by the Father. And the discipline will come to those who are disobedient. And it's really that simple. And it's just understanding and exploring that. We may not be able to figure out all the things in the scriptures, obviously, but if we can understand the fundamental things and at least be obedient in the simple fundamental things, we will be blessed. And that's where it starts. And that's why I encourage everybody here listening to start there and build upon that. Read the scriptures daily. It says, to have it upon your heart and mind day and night. So, I mean, if you're out there watching, TV, which I think most people on this channel probably do not, but if you're filling your mind with other things, you need to consider that, weigh it out, and know that if you want to remain obedient and be a light in this world, that's part of doing that. is training yourself, educating yourself, training yourself in such a way so that you solidify your faith, and then you can walk faithfully and not waver and be grounded, as Michael was talking about earlier, being grounded your seed so that it does not wither away when the heat comes. So I just want to end with that, with encouragement and love to everyone here. And I pray and that everyone will take that and take it to heart and do it. So I'll end what I had to say, and I think this might be a good time to end, Noel. And blessings
I
to
agree.
all. Okay. All right. Love
Yeah.
you guys.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and sign out here as well. Shalom, everybody. You're welcome to, stay on in the after party and talk, but I am going to turn in a little bit earlier tonight just because I am so ambitious to get up early in the morning and get some work done. So, we'll do this again next week. And also, really quickly, next Thursday, Lisa's here in the room. She will be talking about the full moon. She was on a few months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, and she did a presentation on the full moon. She'll be giving one more, and I'm looking forward to it. So, see you all then.
See you, Noel. Thanks.
Shalom.